Welcome back to Good Law, Bad Law. Perhaps no more important issue right now, other than the pandemic itself, obviously, than the urgent need to make sure that everybody votes in November. We have to register to vote. We have to get access to the vote. We have to make sure people are at the polls. We have to make sure that people understand the importance of mailing in their ballots and make sure that all of this is done not at the last minute, but is done early. And to help us understand just why that is so important and why young people in particular are really getting involved, are mobilizing and organizing to make sure this happens, is my guest on today's episode, Kelly Chambers. She's the field organizer, the lead field organizer for one of the largest voter registration groups in the country, HeadCount, a nonpartisan voter registration organization that particularly looks to mobilize young people to register to vote, and now more than ever to make sure that they apply and receive mail-in ballots, that they volunteer to work in polling places where we hope we won't have lines that are too long, and to really stand for the most democratic of our democratic institutions, the vote. So everybody register to vote. Plan to vote, do everything you have to do to make sure that you vote, and enjoy this episode of Good Law, Bad Law. I want to welcome my guest today, Kelly Chambers. She is the field organizer for the nationwide nonpartisan voter registration grassroots organization, HeadCount. Kelly, thank you so much for being on Good Law, Bad Law.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Aaron. I appreciate it.
I think in full disclosure, we have to mention that you are married to one of the lawyers who works in our office, Zach, but enough about him. But I feel we should get that out. I'm really glad that you're on the podcast today and this week because more than ever, we're hearing about trouble coming in November. And the issues of voter registration, issues and questions, and so much misinformation now about mail-in voting, and the importance of all of those as we are now less than 100 days away from the election in November, where Pennsylvania will be a swing state again, for sure. And Philadelphia, where you and I are both located, although we're talking by Zoom here, Philadelphia may decide how the vote turns out in the presidential election in Pennsylvania and may therefore determine the entire election. Not to put any pressure on you, Kelly. But
I mean, and that's why I'm here, because this state is such a pivotal part of what the 2020 election is going to look like. And because we had a lot of changes that took place in October of last year from Act 77 that just changed the way voting works in Pennsylvania. So there's just a lot. It was quite a year to implement those changes, and then to see a pandemic come in when we're voting in a very important election, implementing mail-in voting, this is a little bit less talked about, but we no longer have straight ticket voting. So straight ticket voting used to be something that especially seniors relied on, and we no longer have that option when you go to the polls. So people aren't really talking about that. But there were a lot of changes as part of Act 77 that people are just getting used to. So many people vote by mail who never did before. In Colorado, that's not a huge adjustment. They've been a vote by mail state for years. But in Pennsylvania, it's a new behavior. So there's definitely, we're lucky that we had this change passed before the pandemic, but there's so much going on, and it's a lot to learn for some people.
And as people have been hearing, one of the key changes that Pennsylvania Act 77 state law brought to the the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania was no excuse mail-in voting. You had absentee balloting by mail for a long, long time, but you had to meet certain criteria to qualify to submit an absentee ballot. Now in Pennsylvania, through Act 77, you can mail in your vote for any reason. You just have to ask for mail-in vote, and off you go. So let's get some background on HeadCount, because this is fascinating. And you sent me some materials on the organization. First, I think, as we said, it's important to emphasize HeadCount is a nonpartisan volunteer organization. And according to the materials you sent me, you're promoting participation in democracy through music, culture, and digital media. Around since 2004, you have registered over 650,000 voters, at least as of the time this material was printed. And your group works with, and I want to hear more about this, but some really big names in the music industry, including Ariana Grande and Jay-Z and Beyonce, RuPaul, MTV, Dead and Company. So you're really covering a lot of different musical styles right there. Tell us from your experience a little bit more about the organization, how it connects to music and culture, how you're working with these organizations and these musicians, and what you're really trying to accomplish, and then we'll get into how you're doing that.
So our organization was actually, HeadCount was founded by a musician. He's actually pretty local, just outside of Philadelphia. We started in the jam band community, so that's definitely the connection to the Grateful Dead. Mark Brownstein from the Disco Biscuits was pretty inspired. I mean, I definitely don't remember the 2000 election as well as he does, and as well as probably you do, but the 2000 election.
Oh, that was mean.
Was one.
But true.
But I do remember, even me, and I was young, I remember hearing the buzz. I remember hearing people in my life talking about Florida. That was what people were talking about. And the number of people that decided the election and the bad technology involved in that election, it was such a small number. It was hundreds of people. And our founder was like, just a few hundred people. I have thousands of people come to my concerts. So if we start doing this in a place that, like a music venue or a concert venue or a music festival, we can make a real difference by the next election. And so HeadCount started in 2004, and we've come a long way since then. And we've definitely grown our connections in the music industry, and we've really tried to grow our presence in not just ticketed and event spaces, but also more being a part of the community, being a part of like neighborhood and community events. We are increasing, and before the pandemic, we were doing this too, we're increasing our digital presence in the digital space. So we really are looking to empower, especially youth voters, to come out and vote, and to feel empowered and feel like they understand the nuances of voting so that they'll actually turn out. Because a lot of people, they report that they don't register or they don't vote because nobody asked them to.
Right, and that's been a big issue when you look at different demographics, election after election, has been the youth vote and increasing participation by young voters. In fact, some of the facts in the fact sheet you sent, I think are kind of staggering, that in this election in 2020, 1 in 10 eligible voters were not born in the United States. 1/3 of eligible voters will be non-white in this election. And you're going to have a ton of Gen Z voters this year, 1 in 10, ages 18 to 23. So a lot of people voting in this election will be young people who have an immigrant background or are individuals of color and have never voted before.
Right. Yeah. And this is going to be such a huge year for youth turnout. And we saw some really positive signs in 2018. The 2018 midterms had the highest youth turnout we've ever seen. So those are very promising things, and we need to keep that momentum going. So we're really trying. I mean, that's why we're trying to work with artists. We're trying to work in the digital space, because that's where you can find, we're trying to meet people where they are, whether that be on the corner outside of a dollar store while they're running an errand, or whether that be kind of on Instagram or other social media platforms. That's where we're trying to meet people, and where people are, the meeting people where they are, the meaning of that statement has really changed, especially lately, because we used to always meet people out at concerts and music festivals, and now just the way our social dynamic in the world has completely changed. So we are having to meet people on their cell phones and with texting them and meeting them on social media in different ways than we ever did before. So navigating that it's definitely been interesting, and it's been a way to connect with youth voters as well.
Talk a little bit about how important voter registration is, particularly, I mean, it's important everywhere, obviously, but here in Pennsylvania, again, a lot of attention will be on Pennsylvania's, well, first of all, the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, is originally from Scranton, Pennsylvania, so he may, although he's lived in Delaware for most of his adult life, he grew up in Scranton. I think there's going to be a lot of talk about his origins here. And more broadly, Pennsylvania's been a swing state for a lot of election cycles now, and certainly is going to be again this year. And again, as the largest city in Pennsylvania, turnout, getting voters who are eligible to vote actually to register and then to vote, that can really make all the difference in how the total vote in Pennsylvania goes. Is how Philadelphia goes is how really the entire state goes. So how important is voter registration to that effort overall, and particularly with the youth vote? And what have been the challenges this year in that sense, given the pandemic?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think voter registration, as a piece of it, it is important. And what's important about it is so many people, especially now, a lot of people have been transient because of the pandemic. They're moving from place to place. College students don't know if they're coming back to campus. Like University of Pennsylvania reversed on their decision to open their campus, and they're now not going to open their campus at all. So these decisions are happening right around these registration. We're not at deadline time yet, but it's really not too far away. We're only 83 days from the election, and people are replanning their plans to vote, which it sounds like such a simple process, but having a plan to vote as a person who's not sure if they're moving into a dorm or not, it's very hard. You need to have your address be updated. And some people challenge me on that. They say, why do I need to update my address? And in a place like Philadelphia, just being a few blocks away, your state rep could be totally different. Mm-hmm. So your state representative could really change just in a matter of blocks. And you should be able to be registered where you presently live so that you get any important mail that you would need related to elections. So you do have to update your registration every time you move, which for some young people is every year, especially if you're in a new dorm or something like that every year. And this is something that is happening in every state because it was in 2018, the Supreme Court decided that each state could decide how they maintained their voter rolls. So I think a good example of this is in Georgia. We've seen with Stacey Abrams' work, the governor there made a decision to purge their voter rolls if you were not an active voter. And their way of notifying voters that they were purged from the voter rolls was to send them a pretty nondescript postcard just saying, hey, you're going to be removed. And basically something that looked like a piece of junk mail was actually very important. And a lot of people left it on their dining room table or maybe threw it out right away. They thought, what is this? And they were actually removed from the rolls and disenfranchised from voting. So Georgia is probably like the example, but every state purges their voter rolls to some extent. So checking to make sure that you are still registered. If it's been a few years since you voted, I definitely recommend checking because every state does do this to some level. And there's a reason. I mean, we do need to make sure that we are, people do pass away or people move out of state. We need to make sure that those things are accounted for. But there is definitely voter suppression happening there. And we see it in every state.
Well, and I'm going to do this a couple of times during our conversation, but first of all, tell us what the deadline is for registering to vote, and then give us the website for HeadCount, because the website is fantastic, has a lot of information, and you make it really easy. You just select what state you're in, and you hit that link, and it takes you to all the forms you need to make sure you register, to make sure you request a mail-in ballot if that's what you want to do. I mean, everything is right there at your fingertips. So let's make sure we mention that a couple of times. So what's the deadline for registering?
Definitely. I mean, and it's really easy. You just go to headcount.org, and I mean, you do exactly that. You can request your mail-in ballot there. You can see what the mail-in ballot rules are for your state. I know a lot of people use our site because they're making a decision. You know, maybe they live in New Jersey, but they go to college in Pennsylvania, and they're deciding, you know, what should I call my permanent address? And that is up to the voter in the situation of a college voter. So they can claim college as their address. Now they need to have an actual address. So for students who are no longer assigned a dorm, that's a little bit of a different conversation. But as a college student, if you have an address in another state, you can register there.
Well, that raises an interesting question, Kelly. So let's say, because University of Pennsylvania just is one big university in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania, but thousands and thousands of students there. So if they're now going to online learning in the fall, can a student who's attending Penn virtually, say, but living in New Jersey or living in Illinois or wherever, register to vote in Philadelphia because they're attending that university, even though they're attending virtually?
They need to have an address to claim. So typically if that student was going to reside in a dorm, or there's lots of students who have signed leases now and they're going to keep them because, you know, the lease starts in 2 weeks or whatever it may be. So you do need to have an actual address. It can be a dorm address, but you do need to have an actual address that you can claim. So for those students who have been kind of thrown into limbo at the last minute, they just need to be using a permanent address that they do actually have access to.
HeadCount.org. And what's the deadline for registering to vote?
The deadline is October 19th, but don't wait until the deadline.
Right.
Don't wait until the deadline. Don't wait until the deadline. You can register to vote online. You can register to vote with a paper application, but do it. We're only 83 days away from the election, so the sooner it gets done, the better, but that deadline is October 19th here.
And we were chatting a little bit before we started recording the episode. You mentioned the impact of the pandemic on voter registration, a lot of which takes place through the DMVs, the Departments of Motor Vehicles in your state. Tell us what you've seen in that, and hopefully that's getting better now that things are starting to open up a little bit more.
Yeah, we're starting to see things get better. In March and April, we saw voter registrations decline across the country by 2 million a month for those months. And we're starting to see, luckily in June, we did see a spike, and that was largely in connection to the Black Lives Matter protests and the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. And we've seen those numbers starting to go up. People are talking about November now. The selection of the Democratic vice president candidate, Kamala Harris, last night, people are in tune and in sync, which is, I mean, it's what we expected to happen around this time. It's always when people start to pay a little bit more attention, but people lost that access to the DMV as a resource. We do a lot at the DMV. We can become an organ donor. We can register to vote, and they weren't open in many states for a couple months. Yeah. And now that they are open, people are avoiding them because there's massive lines and backlog. And so we lost access to those services. And it really did have a huge impact on voter registration.
And make a mistake. I mean, you mentioned Kamala Harris and the big news this week with that, but make no mistake, Republicans are out there registering voters too. I mean, everybody is trying to put efforts into this. How is HeadCount doing that? I mean, it's fascinating, the idea that, in fact, I remember going to a concert a year or two ago, and there were a lot of HeadCount people there registering voters, you know, as people were milling around before and during and after the show. Your group was there registering the voters, but you're not having concerts right now. How exactly are you organizing, and what are some of the things that you've had to implement? I mean, obviously social media, but what does that really look like? And how do you reach young people in particular to get them engaged and to take the steps, as easy as they are, to take the steps that they need to take to register to vote?
Yeah, so I'll dig in a little bit more into digital voter registration drives and how that works, and then talk about, we are back out in the field, not in the same way at concerts like you mentioned, but we are back out in the field in other ways, and I'll go into that. In terms of digital voter registration drives, if you go to headcount.org, There's our digital voter registration tools readily available. You can register to vote online in most states. And if you can't register to vote online in your state, the tool will guide you through a fillable PDF and then direct you to print it so you can put a live signature on there. We have those tools available, and we're doing things like we're organizing with high schools. We're reaching out to them via email and trying to get them to share links. And where we saw the most success was students really just getting a hold of a link, and we could say, I can tell you how many voters this link registers. Share it with your friends. And that's what we saw from that peer messaging. So we give them, copy for social media. We give them, advice on things to say. But ultimately, they can make it their own messaging too, which I think some people have a lot of fun with.
So instead of counting likes on your Instagram post, count how many people you've registered with the link that you share with all your friends.
Yeah, it's motivating to hear those numbers, and I think people are looking for ways to connect, and we've done with all of our partners. We're giving them this kind of advice with how to register people to vote. What's effective? A direct email with a voter registration link. That's going to get attention. When you're making voter registration like the point of your conversation, if it's a social media post or something like that, as long as it's front and center, that gets attention. It gets people thinking. It gets people to take. The average voter registration takes like 2 minutes to complete. So it's really not it's not a lengthy process. And then in terms of being in the field, we have been back out since early June. We have people all over the country at different protests that have still been going on. And we have released QR codes and text codes that are on our website, headcount.org/UnitedWeVote. And people can access these. They can print them from their own printers and just hold them up at marches, guide people through the registration process. And we've seen a lot.
Explain, how does that work? That's interesting. I mean, I think I know how. So a QR code is so you hold that up and then somebody from their phone
can scan it.
Scan that code, and then that downloads the forms that they need to fill out?
Yep, it'll link to the digital voter registration tool. And it's actually fun. I mean, I was at a protest the other day and I looked up and somebody had our QR code. So they are getting out there, and that's a way to just sort of get the word out too. And then in Philadelphia, more locally, we're very lucky. We have a great partnership with Share Food, the major food distribution provider. And what Share does is they provide the food and the resources, but they work with people in the community. So maybe it's a state representative or someone who's the executive director of a nonprofit or something like that. And they partner with them to distribute the food. We're there for voter registration, and it gives us a real understanding of each piece of Philadelphia. So on Friday, I'm going to be in North Philadelphia, and we've started setting up there. And then, now that we've been there a few times, people are telling us, oh, you should go by that Boost Mobile. You'll get a lot of people. And we're going there, and we're just kind of popping up, based on advice of people in the community of where we're going to get that foot traffic, and we're going there, and it's working. There are still people aren't gathering in a social sense, but they are gathering where they have to go to the store. They have to run down the street. There are certain blocks in the city that are always busy with foot traffic. So we're finding those places.
I'm going to editorialize a little bit here, but it really does say something about the time, and maybe also, not maybe, for sure, about the importance of this election, that you are, that the places where you're going to find people to register to vote are where they're lining up for food. I mean, this is just, it's just staggering. That in this country we have people lining up for food in the first place. What about young people in particular? I mean, campuses are obviously not going to be the same. We talked about that a little bit. What about, again, socially, Philadelphia is a lot more open, but still, you can't go. There's no in dining at restaurants yet. as in most places. Where are you seeing young people? They must be going absolutely crazy right now in this hot weather that you can't congregate. So where do you go to find young people in the
Yeah,
work?
I mean, they're still out in some of the places that I just mentioned. We were in West Philadelphia the other night, and we were working with this organization called Skate University. So Cohen Thompson is involved with that, and he put some money into a park in West Philadelphia, and he put some of his own funds in it to make it a nicer place for people to skate. And they brought out a DJ, and everyone was skating. And that was a really great example of things that have kind of popped up and gotten some more attention because of what's been going on. So I think they're finding ways. People are congregating in parks. Not that they didn't do that before, but now sort of like lounging out in green spaces is where we can be. I mean, in the beginning of the pandemic, the Schuylkill River Trail had to get shut down because people were flooding it. So people are still in those areas. They're at the Wissahickon a lot. So accessing nature is something people are doing.
Yes. I live just a couple of blocks from the Schuylkill River Trail, which kind of winds up to the art museum in the central part of the city, and then up the famous boathouse row where all the crew boathouses are. And there's always tons of people there. And I don't mean in a bad way. I mean, people are pretty well spread out, and they're, from what I see, mostly wearing masks, which is good and essential. But yeah, you do see people outside, and that's good. So, what about, how are you? Now, it's fascinating to me. The group. This is not just a couple of people working on this, by the way. You have 40,000 volunteers across the country working for HeadCount in these registration efforts. How are you seeing levels of volunteer staffing and what you're trying to do here in Philadelphia? Are people coming here from other parts of the region because of the importance of Philadelphia and the importance of Pennsylvania? Do you see any of that yet?
A little bit, and definitely, I mean, people are energized. I would say that we are actually, because of the shift, we're able to access new volunteers. HeadCount is known for, and will always be known for, our appearance at concerts. So a lot of people who worked 9 to 5 and were available at night. And now we're seeing people who they just meet me out at an event and they say, oh, I want to do this. I didn't know about HeadCount. And so we're meeting people that way. I mean, recently I've had one volunteer who's come in from New York a couple of times just to come all the way down here to register people. So, I mean, 40,000 is our volunteer base, and that's our community. Right now, definitely our field work it's not as robust as it has been in years past because of the pandemic. But we are, I mean, people are engaged in this election. We're working on ways to reach people via text that are going to kick off closer to the election. And that's a really big way to engage our large volunteer base.
If people want to get involved, and I think this is a great idea for everybody out there, come to Pennsylvania, come to places that are really going to make a huge difference in the outcome of the election overall, or where you are, because there are important elections besides the presidential election. You mentioned, even down to the most local of local elections. These are races that are going to affect everybody's life from local to state and on up to federal. So, but if you can, come to Philadelphia and get involved. So if somebody wants to come and get involved and volunteer and help with getting people registered, in particular what you're doing, helping young people register, how do people do that? How do people get involved?
So if you go to headcount.org/events, you'll see some of our events that are posted. But honestly, what the kind of best thing you can do if you don't see something that fits your schedule is just reach out to me directly. Kelly, KELLYC, at headcount.org. And for the people that have reached out to me, we're trying to do something because I want to figure out, like, we're doing an event on Saturday. Somebody reached out to me and I said, well, where do you live? He told me his neighborhood, and I said, okay, well, what's busy around you? Where should we go? What should we do? And we planned something together based on his experience and his
Yeah,
neighborhood.
that's great.
So I want, my volunteers to be comfortable. I want them to know where they're going and feel like, okay, wait, if this doesn't work, I have a plan B. So we're very on the go, and we're having a lot of fun with it, but definitely trying to, have different people reach out and talk about, like, let's try this. Where are people still gathering? Lots of people. I was just talking to someone the other day, and she's from Community College of Philadelphia, and she's like, campus is closed, but that Dunkin' Donuts is still really busy. So people know what's going on in their neighborhood. So
Yeah.
I try to help use that to make a better event.
I want to talk about mail-in voting. We started to talk about that a little bit at the beginning. We're hearing a lot of misinformation about mail-in voting. Our president is encouraging it in states where he wants people to mail-in vote, and is otherwise, raising all kinds of false claims about the dangers, the perils of mail-in voting. The experience we saw in the 2018 elections, and we've talked about this on this podcast, it's pretty clear that the mail-in vote can really be decisive in an election. This is 2018, before there was a pandemic. Now more than ever, we're expecting to see a tremendous increase in mail-in voting. And I was really surprised to know just how many states have the kind of mail-in voting openness that Pennsylvania has. It's, where did I see this? It was something like 35 states. Is that right?
Yeah. And states are kind of
35 and the District of Columbia.
Mm-hmm. And states are opening up. Most states are loosening their, vote from home abilities. Not every state. We're seeing things going on, and in Tennessee and Texas, things are going back and forth in terms of where those states are at with vote by mail, and if COVID-19 is going to be an excuse. So not every state is there, but there are a lot of states that had mail-in voting since before the pandemic. I mean, it's existed since the 1800s. So we've always been able to vote by mail. It's just now we're expanding that to more people.
Yeah.
But vote by mail has been the way that Oregon and Colorado are two states that have had it for a couple decades, and they consistently see high participation rates in their elections. And
we just saw in Nevada passed mail-in voting for everybody. I think it was just last week. So I voted by mail for the first time in the June primary here in Pennsylvania, and I can tell you from my own firsthand experience, it's so easy. It's so easy. You request the mail-in ballot online, just as you can register to vote online. The ballot comes to you, you fill it out, you mail it, done. You get an email confirmation. It's so easy. What do people need to know beyond what I just said from my own experience? It seems, as an organization committed to promoting democracy in a nonpartisan way, it seems so anti-democratic to me to take any step to shut down any vehicle that would allow people to vote, and to do so easily. I mean, the goal should be everybody participating, everybody, as
right.
Many people as possible. That's the most democratic way we could be, and yet we're hearing all this disinformation and what seems like an orchestrated campaign against mail-in voting. So what do people really need to know about it and how important it is, especially this year in the middle of this pandemic?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. Mail-in voting is supposed to be, and what it is it's a tool to enable people, especially people who are at higher risk of contracting COVID-19, or maybe that live in a household that has a lot of people in it, or has a lot of older people in it, to vote safely. So we are lucky that we expanded mail-in voting here in Pennsylvania, and that tracking system that you mentioned, where you're told, oh hey, your ballot is on its way to you. Oh hey, we received your ballot.
Yep.
Not all states have that. Pennsylvania it's lucky, and it's nice that we do have it, because that gives you that security of knowing your vote was counted.
Right.
And mail-in voting, it is it is relatively, it's, I say easy, but I say it kind of with a little like asterisk, because there are things when it's not your way of voting or it's not a habit that you have. We saw a lot of voters have their ballots thrown out in the primary because they didn't sign the back of the envelope.
Yes.
We saw a lot of people have their votes thrown out because their signature on their ballot did not match their signature on file. Your signature on file comes from your state ID. And if you don't have a state ID, it comes from your voter registration. So if those signatures don't match, that's a very subjective decision that one person decides these signatures don't match and they potentially toss your ballot. So that is something that we're seeing, and we just want people to be aware of those things. So if you're going to vote by mail, that's great. Do it early, apply early, get your ballot early, look for that tracking information, and pay attention to that signature piece. Pennsylvania does not have to notify you if they have an issue with your signature, so they don't have to go out and call you. So pay attention to that tracking ability, because it might be something you do want to call about.
Well, and I'll tell you another thing that I don't want to say it's confusing, because it's really not. I was just a dope about it. When you get the mail-in ballot, first of all, please just read the instructions. There's not that many, and it's not that complicated. But when you fill out the ballot, you have to put it into an envelope, and then you have to put that envelope into the envelope that you mail in. Isn't that right? It's like a security envelope. Yes.
So yeah, and that's what I'm saying is these things aren't hard, but when it's a habit that you haven't done before, and it's very easy to just miss. It's very easy to just miss these little things, especially when it's an unfamiliar process. You know, people who, I've talked to a lot of people who really, they want to go to the polls, and the reason is they like the poll workers.
Yeah.
Habit.
They're always so friendly. It's true.
So that, I mean, that is something else that's huge too. The city is doing a big push, and HeadCount is also doing a big push to recruit poll workers.
Yes.
Because mail-in voting is really important, and it's important that we enable as many people to vote as possible, but it's important that we provide the right information and that we're providing more opportunity in every way to vote, to make sure that Americans' votes are counting.
Well, we've seen in some of the primary elections limiting the number of polling places because of not wanting to have people exposed, and particularly in more densely populated areas like big cities, which is going to mean longer lines when people do go to vote. So I think you have to just accept, especially this year, there are going to be these challenges. It's not, you know, there's going to be some challenges, but we should make every effort to make voting as accessible and as easy as it can be. And so what are some of the things? Will HeadCount transition at some point to working with people in terms of the mail-in vote, as in terms of getting volunteers to work at the polling places? When do those efforts kick in?
We recently started a big campaign to recruit poll workers. So to reach out to our huge volunteer base that we have an email for, that we have contact with, we're encouraging people to sign up to be a poll worker, to at least look into it, no matter where they are, because every state's going to have some form of shortage or change in who's available. So we are really trying to recruit our younger volunteer base, especially, to go out and be a part of that. And then, so that is something that we really want people to do and just pay attention to. A lot of the artists that we work with are really involved in this initiative and getting the word out about, you know, become a poll worker. It's one day, it's a hard day, but it's a really rewarding experience. And if it's something that feels safe, it's something that you should do, because we do need to protect democracy in this country. Polling places are going to, in Philadelphia, I would say it's almost a definite that some are going to not be open. We just don't know which ones yet.
Yeah.
So the city's working on their plan for that. but the more that we can have open and the more resources and people working that we can have, you know, the shorter the lines will be.
You know, I think a lot of people, especially during these last months that we've all lived through, first being really completely shut in, and many of us feeling still that we shouldn't be going out and doing things unless we really need to. So I think, first of all, it's very important and courageous for you and all your volunteers to be doing what you're doing, because you have to be out and interacting with people and be in situations where many folks, including frankly myself, still feel nervous about being out in the world. So in these times, you know, you can imagine people still feeling that way, and yet we know that enthusiasm is a big factor in turnout, in ultimate turnout on election day. Now we have early voting, we have mail-in voting. What kind of enthusiasm are you seeing? You mentioned the Black Lives Matter protests. That seems to be something that really has energized and galvanized particularly young people in this city and across the country. I'm not saying it's limited to young people, but seems particularly younger people. Are you seeing that, and is seeing that translate to the voter registration efforts, to mobilizing to make sure people get access to the vote this year?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that. We're seeing a lot of people who want to direct their energy into something. We're seeing a lot of people that do want to be a part of this. So energy has really picked up. I mean, that it was the end of July. It was a Sunday. It was 100 days until election day, and that really lit a fire in people. That 100-day mark, I think, really it woke people up, and it sparked a fire in some people to get involved. Whether that be with voter registration or working with another organization, people felt that day, and they really woke up to, wow, this is really right around the corner, that we have a presidential election. Every state rep is going to be on that ballot. Every representative in the House of Representatives is going to be on that ballot. We have a really big election coming up. So people started paying attention, and they're thinking about it. Definitely felt it from that Sunday.
Well, and I think, you know, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I mean, you can almost feel a sense of helplessness now, because, you know, there's this virus and people still don't really know. You know, it seems like there's more questions still than there are answers about this damn virus. The problems we're facing, you know, some of them seem so huge right now, the stakes so high as a result, the impact on the economy. So many people have lost their jobs, and families impacted, entire communities affected by this. And yet this seems to me to be something, if people are wondering, what can I do? You know, how can I, one person, actually get involved and feel like I'm doing something? It seems like this is one of the more obvious things that people can do and easily get involved to help and make a difference. So if you were speaking to an audience of young people, and I think there are some young people among our listeners, or people who know young people, or anybody really, how would you explain to them, hey, this is something you can get involved in, that you can make a difference in, and here are some things that you can do right now? How would you explain that to people?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a time where I love my volunteers that come out to events with me, but I would never say that you better, you know, be at in the field events. There's a lot of opportunity to get involved with this election. There's a lot of opportunities to get involved. So some people are coming out to field events with me. It's the actual process of registering voters is relatively easy. You're just helping someone with a one sheet info page of, you know, information. So if that's something you want to do, you want to get out of the house, and we're, you know, we're adhering to COVID policies, and we're getting outside, and, you know, you might get to make a couple of friends or meet a couple new people. That might be the way you want to help. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to leave your house, you're not sure, that doesn't feel safe to you, then you can go to headcount.org. I mean, our United We Vote tools that I mentioned earlier, those are accessible to anybody. So people can check out our website, share our resources, and just sharing our resources within your community, that can have a huge impact.
Within your social media community.
Right, exactly, because your peer group is more likely to listen to you.
Mm.
So one of our relational organizing tools is called Me+3, and this is what we offer, because so many people, we would be at a concert, and how many people, we get a lot of, yeah, I'm already registered. Oh, cool, you can still help. You can remind all your friends to vote. So, and you have that power by signing up for this tool where we remind you the 3 names you gave to remind them to vote. So yeah, you're already registered. Even if you're already an active voter, you can always reach out to people in your community. You can always reach out to, if you're a student, part of a student group, you can send out an email blast about voter registration to that student group. I mean, think of all the many communities that we're a part of, how many different Facebook groups or neighborhood groups, or, all the small micro communities that we're a part of that other people are not. Like, I am not going to have the same effect on those communities as a person who's within them.
Yeah. And I mean, TikTok and Instagram, and I mean, you said Facebook for the older crowd, but for the younger demographic, I mean, their social media communities are huge. I mean, the people, I mean, my kids have school friends, they have camp friends, they have, friends in schools they've never even met, but they're part of their community and they talk to each other. Snapchat. I mean, it's incredible what reach those tools have if you're putting these kinds of messages out on them.
And there's a lot of people, and I've seen it too, people are like, oh, of course all my friends are registered. But then you dig a little deeper and you're like, you find out they're not, or you find out they haven't voted since 4 years ago, or you find out that they need to update because they've moved 4 times since they registered. So, and people do. I mean, I'm sure there are people who tell me they're registered all the time when they're not, because they want to say the confusing answer. But it gets people to think about it, like, oh, maybe I will check my registration. She got that in my head. Or, so there's a lot. And I talk to people all the time who think, of course, my friends are registered, but it's not obvious. It's not something that we talk about. It's not something we really talk about on a Friday night with our friends. So we might be assuming that that's the case, and it's not really true.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be about as blunt as I ever am on this. Please vote. Please register to vote. It is so easy, and the stakes, I think everybody knows, the stakes are as high as they've ever been. The issue is so important, and everybody really needs to participate. We need young people to participate, but we need really everyone to be involved. Kelly Chambers, you've got a big task ahead of you in getting Philadelphia rallied to in these now just under 100 days before November 3rd. Big deadlines coming up. October, what again is it for the deadline to register to vote?
October 19th.
October 19th. And when do the virtual doors open, so to speak, to get access to the mail-in ballot? Actually,
they're open.
They're open. They're not available yet, but you can request it now, right?
Request one. So if you requested one from the primary, you had to check a box that said you want one for the general as well. So if you're not sure if you check that box, look into it and be sure, because you can request it again too if you weren't sure about if you were going to mail in vote. But that is up, and that application is live, so it's online. You can request it from headcount.org. And if you have an out-of-state ID, you just can't request it online. You have to have a paper PDF version. But you can still vote that way. Excellent.
Again, we'll put the HeadCount link into and your email, which you were kind enough to share at HeadCount. We'll put that in the description for the episode. But please, everybody, it's so important. Kelly, thank you so much for what you're doing. Stay safe in everything that you're doing, and good luck. And people register to vote and then vote, please. Very important. Thank you so much for being on the on Good Law, Bad Law.
Thank you so much, Aaron, and thank you. This message is important now more than ever. We need to be registered and ready to vote.
It sure is. Thanks again.
All right, thank you.